It was the summer of 1944. The Pacific skies were no longer silent. From newly captured airfields in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, the United States prepared to unleash something Japan had never seen before. A new weapon, a machine born from the furnaces of American industry and the desperation of a global war. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress. It was unlike any bomber the world had known. Pressurized, fast, and able to fly higher than Japanese interceptors could reach. Each one cost over $500,000, more than a dozen P-51 fighters combined. And when its 4 engines roared to life, it carried the power to reach the Japanese mainland for the first time. To the men who flew them, the B-29 represented hope, an end to island hopping, to jungle death, to endless attrition. But for the men who fell from its broken hulls into enemy hands, it meant something else entirely, a descent into hell. The campaign began on June 15, 1944. The first waves of B-29s lifted from Chengdu, China, barely able to climb over the Himalayas, their fuel tanks leaking, their engines stalling from the thin air. Those early raids on the Japanese steelworks in Yawata were disastrous. Half the bombers never made it home. But the Americans persisted. By late that year, Saipan and Tinian were in U.S. hands. Flat islands that could be turned into massive air bases, built for one purpose only: to burn Japan to the ground. From these runways, the 20th Air Force would fly 1,500 miles north to strike Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, cities that had never before felt the war's full fury. Each flight would last over 14 hours. Each one demanded perfect coordination and nerves of steel. Inside the bomb bay, they carried 500-pound demolition bombs, clusters of incendiaries, and, later, napalm. Each man in the crew had a duty: pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, radio operator, gunners. 11 souls aboard a flying fortress, surrounded by nothing but the ocean and death. At 30,000 feet, the Japanese flak guns fired blindly into the dark sky. Tracer shells burst in orange arcs. The Zeros came next, light, agile, and suicidal. In the chaos of air combat, engines were hit, fuel tanks ruptured, oxygen systems failed. Many crews never made it back. Those who survived the crash, those few who parachuted down into occupied Japan or its territories, had no idea what awaited them. For the Japanese military, an American airman was not just an enemy. He was a symbol of the fire that had begun to consume their cities. By mid-1944, Tokyo's propaganda machine was in full swing. The civilians, having seen their homes destroyed and their children killed by American bombs, were told that captured B-29 crews were demons, murderers of women and children. When these airmen were dragged from the wreckage of their bombers, beaten by farmers and soldiers alike, few ever reached a prison alive. Those who did faced interrogations so brutal that even seasoned soldiers broke. In Tokyo's Kempeitai headquarters, the Japanese military police, men were stripped, bound, and starved for days. Interrogators demanded technical secrets: the B-29's altitude, its bomb load, its radar system, the base locations. But for most, there were no secrets to give. They were beaten anyway. Some were executed in public. Others were sent to the notorious military prison in Tokyo, where doctors performed medical experiments on the living. The bodies of captured B-29 crewmen were dissected at Kyushu Imperial University, organs removed without anesthesia, under the guise of medical research. It wasn't just a handful. Between 1944 and 1945, more than 250 American airmen were captured by Japan. Over half never returned. Their names are scarcely remembered in the vast history of the Pacific War. But their stories are written in the testimonies of survivors, the covered after Japan's surrender. Captain Marvin Watkins, shot down over Kyushu in January 1945, survived long enough to testify after the war. He described being paraded through the streets, pelted with stones, spat upon, his uniform torn to shreds. He was taken to Fukuoka, locked in a cell with 9 others. He never saw daylight again until the war ended. Others weren't so lucky. 8 crewmen of a B-29 shot down near Fukuoka were executed by beheading in August 1945, just weeks before Japan's surrender. The order came directly from military command, who feared the Americans would soon invade Kyushu and rescue them. The guards didn't want to risk it. For them, it was better to kill the prisoners quietly than to face the shame of their liberation. The irony of it all? The same week those executions took place, the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The war, as those men died in the shadows, was already ending. By mid-August 1945, Japan was collapsing from within. The cities lay in ruins. Transportation lines were shattered. And yet, in dozens of secret prisons across the home islands, American airmen still sat in cells, unaware that the war outside their walls was ending. When the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima on August 6th, the shockwave didn't just obliterate the city, it shattered Japan's confidence in victory forever. But inside the prisons, guards kept silent. They told the prisoners nothing. Some even whispered that it was Tokyo that had been destroyed, not Hiroshima, a cruel attempt to break whatever hope the captives had left. 3 days later, Nagasaki burned, and on August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's voice echoed across a stunned nation. For the first time in history, the Japanese people heard their emperor speak. He did not say surrender. He said the war had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. Outside, people wept. Some refused to believe it. Others took their own lives rather than face the humiliation of defeat. But in the prisons, in Tokyo, Fukuoka, Omori, and Osaka, there was silence. For days after the emperor's announcement, the prisoners waited for rescue. Instead, in some camps, they were executed. In Fukuoka, guards led 8 surviving B-29 crewmen into the courtyard. They made them kneel. Moments later, they were beheaded, even as Japan's surrender orders had already been transmitted. Their bodies were burned, their ashes, mixed with others, thrown into the river. When Allied forces finally arrived in late August, they uncovered the truth. At Tokyo's Sugamo prison, investigators found human remains, dissected organs preserved in jars, and written records of experiments conducted on downed airmen, vivisections, amputations, injections of seawater, and deliberate infections with disease. At Kyushu Imperial University, doctors had removed the lungs and livers of living men to study the effects of oxygen deprivation. The revelations shocked even hardened war veterans. This wasn't the heat of battle. It was science turned to cruelty. The American occupation forces under General Douglas MacArthur launched an immediate investigation. War crime tribunals were organized, not only for generals and politicians, but for the scientists and doctors who had turned captured airmen into test subjects. At the Fukuoka trial, the Japanese officers in charge of the executions were found guilty of murder. At the Tokyo tribunal, doctors from Kyushu Imperial University were convicted of inhuman acts. But the post-war politics were complex. Many of the doctors avoided the gallows by sharing their research data with U.S. military intelligence. a dark bargain echoing the one made with Germany's scientists after the war. For the families of the captured airmen, the truth arrived slowly. Some never received confirmation of death. Others only learned what had happened through declassified records decades later. To the mothers, fathers, wives, and children who waited, the silence was unbearable. Yet among those lost men, there were survivors. One of them was Sergeant Harold Stassen, a tail gunner shot down over Tokyo Bay in early 1945. He endured starvation, disease, and beatings, but lived to see Japan's surrender. When interviewed years later, he said quietly, "We used to stare through the cracks of the prison walls at the sky. We'd see our planes flying high, B-29s, and know the war was still ours. That's what kept us alive, knowing they were still up there." The story of the captured B-29 crews is one of the least told episodes of World War II. They were not generals, not politicians, not heroes carved in marble. They were airmen, young men barely out of school, who volunteered to fly over fire itself. Their sacrifice did not end when the bombs fell. It continued in the cells, in the darkness, and in the silence of the years that followed. Today, on the grounds of Fukuoka's old prison, there stands a small memorial, a simple stone plaque engraved with their names. Few passers-by stop to read it. Few realize that, beneath their feet, the ashes of American soldiers still rest, forgotten by most, but not by history. The war ended. Japan rebuilt. The United States moved on. But the echoes of those flights, the hum of the Superfortress engines, the courage of the men who climbed into them, knowing they might never return, still linger in the Pacific winds. Their story reminds us that victory isn't only written in battles won, but in the endurance of those who suffered unseen. The B-29 crews who never came home gave more than their lives. They gave us a haunting glimpse into what war does to both the conqueror and the conquered. If this story moved you, stay with us, subscribe, and join us again as we uncover the untold corners of World War II, stories of valor, tragedy, and the thin line between humanity and horror. Because history isn't over, it still speaks. Through the voices of those who refuse to be forgotten.